Doctors, what's the scariest thing a patient did? Story 1. A patient once looked at me with a completely calm face and said, "I know you're trying to help me, but I'm going to die today. I've made peace with it, and you can't stop it." Reply 1. I have a relative who was supposed to have their tonsils out when they were young. The day of the surgery, the doc asked, "How are you doing?" The reply he got from my relative was, "I think I'm going to die today." The doctor canceled the surgery, and those tonsils are still there decades later. Reply 2, I am not a doctor, but I worked with doctors in a hospital ER with a trauma ward. A few of us were making light of a psych patient's claims they thought they were going to die, reassuring them that no, you are not going to die, when the attending doctor mentioned that an uncanny amount of patients, 5% would qualify, seem to be able to sense oncoming death. So when he hears a patient say they think they are going to die, he always takes it seriously. Reply 3, I had a dear friend who had broken her hip. Her doctor came into her room that morning and asked her how she was doing. She told him that she was going to die that day because she had the same rattle in her chest that her mother did when she died. He scoffed and told her she wasn't. An aide came in to help her, rolled her on her side to do whatever she was doing, and she died. I miss her dearly. Reply 4, yeah, sometimes it's just paranoia. But there are times when it seems that somehow the subconscious or something just knows that there's an issue that the conscious mind and the doctors have no idea about. There have also been similar instances of people predicting their very sudden and otherwise unexpected death shortly before any noticeable symptoms develop. It's why a sudden sense of impending doom is actually a symptom that doctors will pay attention to. Reply 5. Oofed! This one hits home for me. Grandpa had late-stage bowel cancer, bedridden, no energy, but holding on so he could say goodbye to his 8 kids, 30-odd grandkids, and 1 great-grandkid that had to fly from Germany to Australia to meet him. Finally, he said his goodbyes, was ready to go, had nothing left in him to hold on. I wasn't there, but the way my dad recounts it was he managed to tell Dad, a doctor, that it was time. Of course, Dad starts having an argument with a few of his nurse sisters. About what you ask, which of them would give him the morphine? In the end, because it was Dad who'd written the prescription and it was his neck on the line, he did it. I got the call that evening, booked a flight back for the next morning, called my bass teacher to tell him I wouldn't be at school for a week. Kind of weird getting that backstage view of death and medicine at 15/16. I think we kind of all collectively try to forget just how brutal slow deaths can be. And that medically assisted induced death, even if not legal everywhere, is often the most ethical route. And there's a decent chance if you're a doctor at some point in your career, you'll add an extra digit to a medication or give a hefty opioid to someone in respiratory distress. Story 2. One of the most gut-wrenching moments in my career was when I was treating a 9-year-old boy who was the victim of significant blunt force trauma. He was unstable but awake and talking. With terror in his eyes, he started thrashing around in his bed and screaming, "Don't let me die! I don't want to die!" It made us all nervous and tense. He went to the OR and survived, but that was 5 years ago and I can still see his face. Reply 1. My 3-year-old daughter passed away from flu that turned into sepsis. She was so scared in the end you could hear it in her voice. She called for her mom till the end. It haunts me still. Reply 2. Wife passed away from something similar. Was actually cancer treatment. She got the flu and turned into sepsis. And the cancer was constricting her spinal column, so she couldn't move her arm. This was about 2 months ago. I'll never forget the fear in her voice when she told me she was scared as the EMTs were taking her to the hospital. I can't imagine what losing a child is like. I know everyone grieves differently, and it's not a competition, but losing a child is the only thing I can imagine that hurts worse than this. Memories like this have a habit of creeping up and making you lose it a little bit. I was at the dentist yesterday and had to convince the hygienist I was only crying because I was in mourning and it was nothing she did wrong in my mouth. I know you said it's been a while, but I hope you're doing okay and continue to do okay. Reply 3. My sister died of a rare bone cancer summer before last, and the hardest part about it was that it didn't seem like she ever made peace with it. She was so very scared and just devastated right up until last week, when they basically knocked her out because they couldn't control the pain anymore. She was always so worried about what other people thought she hardly wanted anyone to see her the whole 2 years she was sick. Like she was embarrassed she had cancer. That last week so many people came through while she was out, I just kept thinking how mortified she would be to know all of them were seeing her this way. My biggest hope is that she is at peace and somehow lying there sedated came to a peace and was ready. Screw cancer. Reply 4. My 22-year-old son was recently hit by a car while he was walking home from work. In the emergency room, they were trying to intubate him, but he was struggling. I reached between two people to touch his arm and said something like, "I'm here." He stopped struggling, looked right at me and said, "Daddy, I hurt. Daddy, I hurt," and passed out. He hasn't called me daddy since he was 5. I don't recall the drive to the hospital or the next several hours with any clarity, but my heart stopped and I still wake up hearing him say that. Story 3. During my med school trauma surgery rotation, our 16-year-old patient said, "My stomach hurts," right before he was intubated for an exploratory laparotomy. He'd gotten shot in his abdomen. Intra-op, we noted that the bullet tore a hole in his aorta. He didn't make it. Such innocent last words to hear a kid say. He fully didn't grasp his fate at the time, and understandably so. I will never forget it. Reply 1. My father was in the Air Force as a doctor. Even being a military man, he was always anti-guns. When I was older, I asked him why, being a military guy, he was so anti-guns. He said, "Try stitching up a 12-year-old that was shot during a drive-by he had nothing to do with and the kid not making it." Something he had to do during his time in training in the ER. He did his residency at St. Jude in Tennessee in the late 80s. When he said that to me about stitching up a child, that hit hard. I own a gun and am still pro-gun, but I get what his viewpoint is. Ownership and responsible gun handling is key. He has quite a few other stories I'd gun knife violence from his time at the ER, and he only did a month or so before going into his subspecialty stuff. Reply 2. Had a similar experience. A man around 40 years old. Blunt trauma, hit behind a truck with his motorcycle. Emergency exploratory laparotomy. The man literally said his last prayers before anesthesia induction and said he is ready. It turned out to be a vena cava inferior injury, which was self-limited because of bleeding. But the moment the abdomen was cut with scalpel, it all burst out, and we started doing CPR next minute. We did everything we could, but he died. Story 4. As a resident working off service, I looked a woman dead in the eye before we were about to intubate her. She had the saddest look in her eyes and said, "Don't let me die." She had awful esophageal and rectal varices that were never successfully treated and passed away that night in the OR. Still see it in my thoughts from time to time. Reply 1. Paramedic here. Had a 8-week-old SIDS death at daycare. Doing CPR on him and mom got there. Everyone cleared out of the back of the medic except me to continue compressions. She gave him a kiss, said a little prayer, then looked me dead in the eye and said, "Don't let him die." He was pronounced a minute after we got in the ED room. That was 21 years ago. Still haunts me. Reply 2. There was a recent med publication that came out identifying SIDS was correlated to a protein deficiency in the brain. If memory serves, the aim is now to test for those protein levels now ahead of any sort of concern. Thanks for being there for the family. I hope this recent discovery helps to alleviate the cross you bear. Reply 3. Sorry, buddy, I had that happen as a new attending once with a dissection patient. I won't let you die, man. We will take good care of you. Codes and dies on the way to the OR within minutes, only 40s. That one still haunts me also, and it's been a decade. Reply 4. You reminded me of the guy that still haunts me. He was in a car accident and they couldn't find which part of his insides he was bleeding from. I had to take off his wedding ring because his fingers were starting to swell. He looked up at me and asked, "Am I going to die?" I told him no, I'm just making sure they don't have to lop off his finger later. He laughed and asked me to call his wife so he could let her know what room he was in. She sounded like a nice lady. He ended up dying 3 hours later. Reply 5. I remember one of the COVID patients during the Delta wave hit my ICU hard, saying that to me right before I intubated him. He had been an anti-vax guy, COVID skeptic, etc., like most of the Delta patients we had, right up until then when I think it hit him that this might be the last words he'd ever speak. Unsurprisingly, he was right about that. I didn't want to lie to him, so I just told him, "I promise I won't let you suffer." And that was that. Spent a few weeks intubated, died, just like all of them. Story 5. The scariest thing I ever heard working in healthcare was not from a patient, but a nurse who called me to report an outbreak of rabies at one of the nursing homes I worked in senior management for. I managed to stop myself freaking out for long enough to ask her the necessary questions. Thank goodness English wasn't her first language and she'd got 2 words confused. Scabies. She meant scabies. Reply 1. Similar thing happened to me. I had a friend with a thick Scottish accent and he kept telling me to look at the guy across the room because he clearly had herpes. I was shocked how he could tell and asked what he was seeing. He said it was obvious if I looked at his head. Turns out saying hairpiece in a thick Scottish accent sounds like herpes. Reply 2. When my daughter was about 7 years old, she woke up one morning with a scratchy throat and couldn't talk well. Her dad, who's a doctor, told her she probably had laryngitis and she should go to school. If she started feeling worse, she could go to the office and ask to go home. She did end up feeling worse and went to the office and told the ladies that her dad told her she probably had leukemia. Reply 3. Something similar happened at my sister's work. One of the employees called in saying he had tuberculosis and would be back to work in a couple of days. My sister tried to make sure he didn't mean another disease, but the guy insisted he had tuberculosis. They eventually had to make the guy have his doctor's office call them so they could confirm before they shut down the office. The guy did not have tuberculosis. I don't remember what he had, but it was something with a similar sounding name like tonsillitis. Reply 4. I had the exact same thing happen when I was working as an assistant in a nursing home here in the UK. We all got called into the manager's office where she calmly told us we had an outbreak of rabies. I have never been as scared as I was for the 30 seconds or so it took for one of the nurses to correct them as scabies. My bumhole was twitching like a rabbit's nose. I was also briefly impressed with how calm the manager was about rabies. Story 6. Not a doctor or a nurse. One of my uncles had stage 4 pancreatic cancer. He was a tough guy and didn't trust hospitals, so he didn't see a doctor until it was way too late, despite being in debilitating pain. When he did, the prognosis was grim. He had maybe 6 weeks left, and pancreatic cancer is a painful way to die. He decided to get MAID instead. Medical assistance in dying, which is legal in Canada. On the day we were all gathered around his bed, all the paperwork and permissions were sorted out and the syringe of drugs was connected to his IV. He was heavily sedated, but he had to be the one to push the plunger, which he did with the help of his wife. He closed his eyes and his breathing got very shallow and slowed down. After a few minutes, we thought he had passed. We were all standing around him, some saying goodbye. A lot of people were crying. About 10 minutes passed, and people started to leave when suddenly, in a strong, clear voice, he said, "Russell, wait for me." Then he was gone. Nobody knew who Russell was, and it was kind of a mystery we talked about from time to time. Years later, his wife passed, and when his kids were going through her things, they found a very old photograph of him when he was maybe 5 years old. He was in a sandbox with a small dog. On the back of the picture in faded ink, it read, "Russell, 1944. The thought that our pets that have gone before us meet us to help us cross over fills me with comfort. I hope it isn't just a mind trying to make sense of a crazy time. Reply 1. My great-grandma was a hospice volunteer. I've told this story in this thread already, but I want you to hear it too. And she had so many clients that would be visited by loved ones from their lives that had passed away. So many that she believed it wholeheartedly. She was fascinated with death, in a way. Her time came this January, and her son told me she had been hallucinating cats and dogs and people that weren't alive anymore. I don't think she was hallucinating. I think that if you die a natural death, you're going to be visited, and you're going to want nothing more than to go with. One of the clients while I was living with her was all "Ope, everyone's here, so I guess I have to go now." All cheery as a person in a cheese shop. And then she did it. She closed her eyes, and she was gone. Grandma went with her people too, and I'm hoping that when I go, at least my dog will be there. He tends to scream when he hasn't seen me in a while. It'll be okay. Story 7. Not a doctor, but before my grandfather passed of pancreatitis, I'll never forget when he looked up at me and told me that, "Don't worry, they're already here, all of them, before dying." Not really sure what that means, but it creeped me TF out for a few years. On a lighter note, my other grandpa died a little bit after I walked into the room with a new mustache I was trying to sport. He laughed at it, and I like to think about that sometimes. The very last thing he did after a full life of ups and downs was laugh at my stupid mustache. Reply 1. My granny said something similar a little while ago. She saw a dream of an old male woman who said to her that, "They are all there waiting, what's holding you?" Then she woke up and the doctor told her her heart had stopped for a while during an operation they did to her. I've told this here before, but my other granny died last year. My mother was with her. Granny was talking about a bird trapped inside the house, flapping around in distress. My mother said there was no bird, but she insisted my mom had to open the door and let the bird out. My mom eventually went to the door, opened it, and slammed it shut so Granny would hear it. When Mom came back, she was gone. My mom just said that the bird took her. Reply 2. My granddad saw his old dogs, and the child I lost would play with him. He said he wouldn't sleep at night because he'd not wake up again. He used to wake up at 6 a.m. He didn't sleep the night he died, but died at 6 a.m. So he wasn't wrong. He wouldn't have woken up had he fallen asleep. Instead, he had the night surrounded by his kids playing, laughing, telling old stories, eating ice cream, etc. Reply 3. Reminds me of my dad. The nurse told him, "We're going to stop the machines. The toxins will build up in your blood. We'll manage your pain. It'll be just like going to sleep." His last words were fake snoring at her. It's funnier still because I remember in the moment I'd been an EMT for years. But just about then it was inevitable he was dying that day and I still didn't see it. He never said he was dying. I saw the worried doctors coming to see him. But I still thought he had 6 more months, years even. He went from the ER, then to observation, to high level, to the ICU. And besides a few times, I never thought he was dying. So I actually laughed when he pulled out that corny canned heat BS. Reply 4. My grandpa, who passed in 2001, was very agitated the last time he was awake and mostly coherent. We knew the end was coming and he wasn't doing well. The last time he got up to use the bathroom, my mom and aunt were helping him back to his chair and he said he didn't want to sit down. He said, "I need to go somewhere, but I'm not sure where." He didn't wake back up after he fell asleep. Reply 5. The night before my grandma passed, I heard her in her room talking to someone saying, "Oh, fancy seeing you here, it's been so many years," etc. She sounded so thrilled to see whoever it was. The super creepy part is, I heard several people responding to her, voices I didn't know but had the same accent as my grandma, telling her they came to get her. It was time to go and reminiscing about their past and joking with her. They weren't quiet or subtle. It fully sounded like my 89-year-old grandmother was having a sleepover at 2 a.m. In the morning, Grandma was asleep and wouldn't wake up when my mom first checked on her. Then when we went in around lunchtime, we found her on the floor, unresponsive. She never regained consciousness and was gone in a few hours. At least we know she was happy to go. Story 8. Doctor here. First one that sticks to mind isn't so much what the patient said, but more her body language that clued into what was going wrong. Story. I was a medical student at the time, and the city my school was in is a hub for human trafficking. I noticed a patient in the ER who had a pretty bad injury to her face was with a sketchy-looking guy who was not related to her. She wasn't my patient, but I brought my gut feeling up to her doctor, who then made up some excuse to talk to the patient alone and got her to help. Turns out she was a victim of human trafficking. I never talked to her myself, but I couldn't shake the vibe I got from looking at her and the man she was with. Reply 1. It's a sad fact that airline staff receive training specifically on spotting the signs of trafficking/kidnapping and how to handle it. I do love the speaking alone thing used by doctors. Like, after a certain age, a lot of GPs I've spoken to have a rule that during appointments they'll get the parent to leave the room whether or not the kid has questions and give the kid a chance to speak freely, to ask awkward questions, things like that. Obviously harder to do in an emergency setting, but a really good tool. Reply 2. I'm a hairdresser and I've taken classes or seen seminars on spotting the signs of domestic violence. Most people can't see bruises on someone's next chest, but you can't wear a scarf or a hoodie during a haircut. We also notice when a chunk of hair is missing, regardless of how well it gets covered or styled to hide it. A lot of things most people wouldn't think to not only look for, but sometimes wouldn't think twice about. Cut It Out is the program through the Professional Beauty Association I follow. Great tips and resources to familiarize yourself with. Reply 3. I have a similar story. I'm not a doctor, but I was in the ER because I was being a baby about a nasty flu I had. While I was waiting, I noticed a girl with a pretty bad injury on her face. It looked like she had face planted badly, The first thing I noticed was how casual she was about it. Then I noticed the guy with her, and I realized he never took off his gloves. It was winter, but it wasn't icy, and we were in a heated ER. The gloves never came off. Anyway, I brought it up to the doctor I saw after he called me a little baby for coming in. He seemed rather startled and assured me they had protocols for that kind of thing. Reply 4. Human traffickers are such garbage. No past childhood trauma or other issue excuses what they do, in my opinion. A friend of mine was the victim of trafficking long before I met her. She was a child in the system, being moved from one foster family to another, and an older boy she met played in on that. He provoked her into rebelling against the foster family she was with at that time, one she already wasn't happy with, as well as turning her against her friends. When she had nobody left to lean on, he made her dependable on hard drugs and had her run away with him. Before long, he was prostituting her for what I assume was drugs money. It took close to a year for her to get out of that, thanks to someone who recognized her and intervened. Here in Europe, or in the Netherlands, Belgium, and I think Germany at least, they call those young men lover boys, a term for a teenage pimp who gets underage girls into prostitution. It's probably not called that in the US or UK, I imagine. At times they work for criminal groups for payment, but not always. Good on you for trusting your gut feeling and intervening when you did. Story 9. As a resident, a patient was super angry and signed his papers to leave against medical advice. He looked at me and said, "I know what time you sign out, and I know where you all leave the hospital." Looked over my shoulder the entire walk home. Reply 1. Similar thing happened to me when I was a student. I had to do my emergency rotation at a crappy hospital, and all the doctors left you completely alone on the night shift. One night, someone came after a bar fight, and while I was doing his sutures, he started threatening me, said that he was part of a gang and that they were going to come for me. I left the dude there, went for the ER doctors, told them that I wasn't safe, and left. They had to call a surgeon to finish his care. Reply 2. Surgeon here. My threshold for getting the hospital police to chat with someone for things like this is 0. Some of my colleagues think you should give people grace when they say crap like this because they're having a bad day. But I just walk out of the room and summon the emergency room cops over for a chat. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes, had a patient who was a hospital employee making dumb threats. Lost his job that day, oh well. I also just stop whatever I'm doing and cease care the second someone tries to film me. Not interested in going viral doing a PEDS forearm reduction. You want me to treat you? You follow my rules, which means phones away. You don't like it. Reduce your own fracture. Story 10. Doc, I can't wait to have this baby. We'll finally have our baby girl. Now we can stop trying. When I was doing my final year of hospital rotations, I got called into one of the OB ultrasound rooms by the attending. I was just about to leave since my shift had just ended, but decided to see the one last patient since we had such a good shift, and I didn't mind making another patient stay. The attending points to the ultrasound and asks if I can see the heartbeat. I thought she was just quizzing me since I was a med student, and I was internally panicking since I couldn't see it. I apologized for what I assumed was my lack of knowledge. Turns out I was called in to confirm lack of heartbeat on this 8-month-old baby in utero. They needed 2 doctors to confirm. I never wanted to be more wrong my whole life. When I was left alone with the patient, she kept trying to convince herself that she was okay and that she had 3 other children to come home to. But you could tell how devastated she was. Then she said, "I guess I was right. This was going to be my last baby," and then just walked out. I was on call the next day and ended up seeing her through pre-op, the delivery, and post-op. She's one of the patients I will never forget. Reply 1. This is so hard. When I had my son, 21 years ago this week, he was small and couldn't hold his temperature, so he was moved to the children's hospital. I got close with a woman who had her son the same day as we would make our way together to the children's hospital. Every morning, she had lost 3 babies before in her second trimester. This baby she was able to carry to the early 3rd trimester, but she stumbled over her dog and fell. The baby came that day. My son was released after a week and we didn't stay in contact. 3 months later, I ran into her and her husband in town. She looked at my son sleeping in his pram and just walked away. The husband apologized and told me their son had passed away at 10 days old. I still think of her every year around my son's birthday. I hope she got to have her family after all. All she wanted was a family, and life can be so cruel. Reply 2. I was that mom. Lost my baby boy at 8 months unexpectedly, and I was alone in the hospital when the nurses and then the OB could not find his heartbeat. The nurses could not find his heartbeat at first, and I went into a blind panic. They then told me they found it and that he was okay, and I wept and thanked God and the universe, all the cosmic forces with every ounce of my being. I was so relieved. Turns out that they mistook my own racing, panicked heart for a fetal heartbeat. Thank you for not forgetting. I am okay, and I hope she is too. Reply 3. My wife is pregnant with our first baby girl, and this is a truly terrifying thought. I already get anxious when the thought enters my head that something could go wrong with my wife during labor, but hearing this gives me an entirely new fear altogether. I've known that I wanted a baby girl since I was fairly young. To lose her before I even met her would break me in a way I cannot fathom. That being said, I also can't put myself into the shoes of someone who has to be the one to break that form of news to someone. I am so very sorry that you had to be in that position. Reply 4. When I went for my 12-week scan, there was no heartbeat. My baby died at 9 weeks old. I was devastated. But I also remember being in denial. When I went home, my husband and I discussed getting a second opinion, because we were afraid of having our living baby removed, as I opted for the surgery. It's crazy how in denial you can be in such a traumatic situation. But we had to eventually admit it was true. Our baby was gone. Story 11. First month as an intern. At this point, I know everything to crush med tests, but nothing to handle a patient. Only a doctor covering the night shift at a VA. Code green, which at this location means a patient is hostile. Jog around a corner, find Mr. S, who I admitted a few hours earlier, now sundowning and holding a piece of broken glass in front of him like a knife. Sundowning is when an elderly, maybe demented patient has increased confusion / agitation early in the night, especially in an unfamiliar setting, which every hospital is. He's holding the broken glass towards the charge nurses and screaming nonsense, mainly F-bombs and wanting to go home. Me too, man. 2 police officers are standing a couple yards in front, one touching his sidearm. Nurses and techs are lining the hallway. Lights are on, TVs are on. Mr. S is not enjoying his stay. Everyone looks at me, the youngest, least experienced. Why not? So, what do you do? First thing, greet Mr. S. I admitted him, so I knew he was a good guy in a confused state. I never mentioned the situation, just started a random polite conversation. Next, motion for the cops to leave, the extra nurses and techs to leave, turn off the TVs, turn off the overhead music, turn off some lights, de-escalate everything. And then, with just the charge nurses and I in the hallway, minimal stimulation, we waited him out. Eventually, he forgot about what he was holding as we talked about his wife and fishing outside the city. We did end up giving him a sedative once the danger passed. Not sure if I should have. And the next day, we got him home. Reply 1. Had a similar situation, but less intense, a few years ago at an assisted living I worked at. Got a call late on PM shift from the other building. The 2 workers were trapped in the nurses' station because the building's wanderer with dementia. Mr. Jack decided he absolutely hated their guts and wanted to beat the crap out of them. I responded and ran over. I'd seen the man once or twice, but never worked with him. Thankfully, he was pretty short and wiry, but was known as extremely combative. I walked up to him, and in the seconds before he realized I was one of them, I greeted him with a smile, a handshake, and Jack, how the hell are you? In his momentary confusion, I ushered him away from the door a bit and asked him, what the hell are those girls up to now? He started piping off about how they're all crazy and how he's just trying to get home. I led him away from the door, managed to sit with him on the couch, and talked on phone numbers so I could call him for a ride. This man was very, very confused at this point in his life, which was my only saving grace. I was able to leave a few minutes after that with no further incident. Reply 2. I'm glad you handled it that way. My dad died in the hospital when a similar situation went differently. He was admitted for difficulty breathing. They found water in his lungs, so they were draining that, and he was improving, but still on an O2 cannula at some times. The cannula was on the bed, and my dad was ambulatory, so he was sitting in a chair watching TV, and the nurse came in, noticed his blood stats were low, and asked him to move to the bed. Dad says sure, stands up, and we're not sure what happened, but he must have gotten confused because he started fighting with the male nurse. I happened to meet this nurse when I was with Dad at the beginning of his shift. He was a smaller guy, 5'6"-ish, maybe 150-ish. My dad worked construction for 45 years. He was about 5'8" and about 250. Old man strength to the max. I totally get why they went for the sedative. I know my dad. If he was confused raging, it'd take more than a couple big cops to take him down. But it caused a pulmonary arrest, and it took them 10 mins to get him breathing again. We turned off the machines that night, and he passed the next morning. When we got the call from the hospital that something had happened, we passed that nurse on our way to meet with the doctors. I'll never forget the look on that man's face when he saw his patient's entire family go to meet with the doctor about turning off the machines. We were too involved in our own pain to say anything, but dude, we don't blame you. I've talked to family about this. You were in an impossible situation. You tried your best, and it went the wrong way. I just wish that we would have defied my dad and kept someone in the room with him 24/7 until he was released. I'm convinced that a familiar face or voice in that moment would have gotten my dad back into bed, and he'd have been around for another decade, maybe.
Thanks for watching until the end. If you have a similar story to these that you want to share with us, please leave it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave us a like and subscribe. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel. Thanks again, and see you next time.